At 3:15 in the morning, the executive gym on the 22nd floor of Apex Dynamics belonged to silence. Devon Walsh gripped his cleaning cloth tighter as he watched through the glass walls. A woman in a pristine black G moved across the mats with lethal precision. Her strikes cut through air like she was fighting invisible demons, each movement deliberate, calculated, deadly. Victoria Chen, the billionaire CEO, trained alone in the dead of night like she had something to prove to ghosts no one else could see. When she turned, catching his reflection in the mirror, her eyes didn't show surprise. They showed recognition. "Hey, janitor," she called out without turning around, her voice carrying an edge that made Devon's blood run cold. "Want to spar?" The simple bracelet beneath his work shirt suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Because the way she said those words, the way she already knew exactly who he was, told him everything he feared. This wasn't an invitation. It was a reckoning. Devon's hand moved instinctively to his sleeve, covering the worn leather bracelet that had become his anchor for the past 10 years. Strength in silence. The words Rachel had engraved before cancer took her voice, then her breath, then everything else that mattered. He'd been cleaning these floors for 6 months, invisible to everyone who mattered, just another night shift worker keeping the corporate machine running. But Victoria Chen wasn't treating him like he was invisible. She moved closer to the glass wall, and he could see the calluses on her knuckles, the way her stance remained perfectly balanced. This wasn't some rich woman playing at martial arts. This was a predator who knew exactly what she was hunting. "I don't think that would be appropriate, ma'am," Devon managed, his voice steadier than he felt. Victoria stepped through the gym door into the hallway where he stood. Up close, she was smaller than he'd expected, but there was something coiled about her presence, like a spring loaded and ready to release devastating force. "I'm not asking as your boss," she replied. "I'm asking because you move like someone who's seen real combat, and I need to test something." Her eyes never left his face, reading micro-expressions the way a sniper reads wind patterns. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made Victoria's features look sharper. Devon could smell determination that clung to her G, mixed with expensive perfume that spoke of boardrooms and power. It was a contradiction that unsettled him almost as much as her invitation. He touched his bracelet again, a nervous habit that Rachel used to tease him about. "Promise me you'll remember, Devon. Real strength isn't about who hits harder." But looking at Victoria Chen now, Devon wondered if Rachel had been wrong. Because this woman radiated the kind of quiet menace that came from knowing she could destroy you in multiple ways. The question that burned in his throat was simple, but terrifying. What exactly did she need to test? Devon Walsh had learned to recognize danger long before his Marine Corps training taught him to neutralize it. 10 years ago, he'd been Staff Sergeant Walsh, decorated combat veteran with a beautiful wife who believed in peaceful solutions even when her husband struggled with rage. The anger had been his companion since childhood, a fire that the military had taught him to channel but never truly extinguish. Rachel Santos had been his salvation, a VA nurse whose patience slowly taught him that real strength meant choosing restraint over retaliation. Marriage to Rachel meant taking her surname, partly for love, but mostly to escape the shadow of his military record. The dishonorable discharge had followed him like a stain, making civilian employment nearly impossible. They'd built a small, careful life together, until cancer arrived when Zoe was 3, turning their savings into medical debt and their future into a countdown. Rachel died on a Tuesday morning in October, holding Devon's hand and making him promise to be the father she knew he could be. 6 years of single parenthood had taught Devon that survival meant accepting whatever work paid enough to keep Zoe fed and housed. Night custodian at Apex Dynamics paid $16 an hour, enough for their one-bedroom apartment and Zoe's after-school care. He worked 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., slept while she attended 3rd grade, and spent every afternoon helping with homework. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was honest work that let him stay invisible. Until tonight. Until Victoria Chen looked at him like she could see straight through his carefully constructed anonymity to the truth he'd been running from for a decade. The truth about what happened during that training session at Camp Pendleton. The truth about Timothy Chen and the sound his spine made when it snapped. Standing in that fluorescent-lit hallway, watching Victoria's predatory smile, Devon realized that some truths have a way of finding you no matter how far you run. "One round," Victoria said, her voice deceptively casual. "Unless you're scared." The challenge was designed to trigger exactly the kind of masculine pride that had gotten him in trouble before. But Devon had learned something about fear. Sometimes the scariest thing was discovering that your past had finally caught up with your present. Victoria's training sessions became a ritual neither acknowledged as more than professional curiosity. 3 a.m., executive gym, 2 people working through demons while Phoenix slept. She was tournament-level good, with technique that spoke of years dedicated to perfecting her craft. But Devon's military combatives gave him different angles, defensive strategies that prioritized survival over scoring points. They were evenly matched in ways that surprised them both. "Where did you train?" Victoria asked after their second session, studying him with calculating eyes. Her GI was perfectly maintained, expensive in the way that only came from serious commitment. Devon's borrowed gear looked shabby by comparison, but he moved in it with muscle memory that couldn't be faked. "Paris Island," he answered carefully, not mentioning advanced courses at Quantico. "Some local gyms before my wife got sick." The partial truth felt safer than the full story, though he suspected Victoria was collecting pieces of a puzzle she already knew how to solve. "You stopped training." There was something sharp in her voice, as if his answer mattered more than casual interest would justify. Devon touched his bracelet through his shirt. Rachel's final gift had become his anchor, a physical reminder of his promise to choose peace over violence. For 6 years, he'd kept that promise, channeling his protective instincts into being the father Zoe needed rather than the weapon the Marines had created. Their third session felt different. Victoria brought energy bars and asked about Zoe, showing interest that wealthy people sometimes displayed toward employees' personal lives. When Devon mentioned his daughter struggled with confidence after being bullied at school, Victoria's response was immediate. "IPEX has a corporate wellness program, children's activities included." The offer came with paperwork that appeared the next night, conveniently available exactly when he needed it. During sparring, Devon noticed Victoria's technique included elements from multiple disciplines: Krav Maga, wrestling, even military combatives not typically taught in civilian BJJ schools. When he mentioned it, she deflected. "I study whatever works," she said, but her eyes held secrets that made Devon's blood run cold. There was something hunting-like about how she analyzed his movements, cataloging weaknesses like she was building a psychological profile. The moment that changed everything came during their 4th week. Devon arrived to find Victoria watching security footage on her laptop, multiple screens showing different angles of their previous sessions. "Reviewing my cleaning technique," he joked, but his voice sounded strained. The sight of himself on those screens, revealing muscle memory he'd tried to bury, felt like exposure in the most vulnerable sense. "I was analyzing our sparring sessions," Victoria replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You favor your left side when defending takedowns." The casual way she delivered the observation made it clear she'd been studying him far more intensively than casual interest would justify. After training, Victoria asked about Rachel with focused attention that suggested genuine interest. Devon found himself sharing how they'd met at the VA hospital, how she'd helped him manage his anger issues, how her research into movement-based therapy for combat PTSD had influenced his recovery. Something flickered across Victoria's face when he mentioned Rachel's research, recognition mixed with something darker. That night, driving home through empty Phoenix streets, Devon couldn't shake the feeling that he was being maneuvered into position for something he didn't understand. Victoria's interest felt too focused, too knowing. The employee benefits that appeared exactly when he needed them. The security footage. Rachel had always warned him that his past would eventually catch up, but he'd never considered it might come wearing designer suits and speaking with quiet authority. The revelation came like a physical blow, sudden and devastating. Devon arrived for their usual session to find Victoria's office blazing with light at 2:30 in the morning. She was on a video call with military officials and legal representatives, screens displaying documents that made Devon's heart stop beating. "The Chen family settlement has been finalized," Victoria was saying. $8.5 million for the wrongful death of my brother. The words hit Devon like shrapnel. My brother. Timothy Chen wasn't just a name in his nightmares. He was Victoria's brother. "The training incident was ruled gross negligence," continued a voice from the laptop. "Instructor Walsh's anger management issues were well documented." Devon's hand found the door handle without conscious thought. The door opened with a soft click that seemed to echo like a gunshot. Victoria turned slowly, no surprise on her face, just the satisfied expression of someone whose trap had finally been sprung. "Timothy Chen was your brother," Devon said, not bothering to make it a question. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Victoria's specific interest in his combat training, her knowledge of PTSD therapy, how she'd maneuvered him into revealing exactly who he used to be. This wasn't coincidence. This was calculated, methodical revenge disguised as professional courtesy. "Yes," Victoria replied, standing with fluid grace. "Little Timmy, who wanted to teach elementary school kids and believed everyone deserved second chances. The brother who wrote me emails about the troubled instructor he wanted to help." Each word was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cause maximum emotional damage while maintaining perfect composure. Devon felt the walls closing in, 10 years of carefully constructed peace crumbling. "You knew," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "From the beginning, you knew exactly who I was." The sparring sessions, the employee benefits for Zoe, the casual questions, all of it had been an elaborate psychological operation. "I've known for 3 months," Victoria confirmed, moving to the window. "Ever since my private investigator confirmed that Devon Walsh, former staff sergeant, had taken his deceased wife's surname and was working night shift custodial in my building." The casual way she delivered this information made it clear she'd been planning this confrontation for far longer than their month of training sessions. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with the weight of Timothy's absence and the scope of Victoria's deception. Devon thought about Zoe, sleeping peacefully, trusting that her father would come home safe from his simple night job. He thought about Rachel's bracelet and her faith in his ability to choose peace over violence. He thought about Timothy Chen, young and eager and dead, because Devon had failed to control the monster inside his carefully maintained exterior. "What do you want?" Devon asked finally, though he suspected he already knew. Victoria Chen had spent 5 years building a technology empire while planning for this moment when she could confront her brother's killer face to face. "I want to understand," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "I want to know what kind of man destroys a family and then disappears into a new life like nothing happened." Devon closed his eyes and saw Timothy's face again. Young, earnest, trying to help during a training exercise that had gone catastrophically wrong. The flashback triggered by unexpected contact, combat instincts that overrode rational thought, the sickening sound of impact. When he opened his eyes, Victoria was watching him with the intensity of a prosecutor. "I think about him every day," Devon said, surprising himself with steadiness. Timothy, not just his name, but who he was, what he wanted to become. The kids he never got to teach because I couldn't control my temper for 30 seconds. The admission felt like bleeding out, but also like relief. He spent 3 years in a wheelchair before the infections killed him. Victoria replied, controlled fury more terrifying than screaming would have been. 3 years of pain because you couldn't manage your anger during routine training. This was the sound of someone who had channeled grief into purpose and purpose into meticulous planning. The conversation that followed felt like surgery without anesthesia. Victoria methodically dissecting Devon's excuses while he tried to explain the inexplicable. How combat PTSD could turn routine situations into perceived threats. How Timothy had approached during a severe flashback, trying to help when Devon's mind was still fighting wars that had officially ended. How the throw that broke Timothy's spine had been reflexive, defensive. "I looked for your family afterward," Devon said, desperation creeping in. "Tried to reach out, apologize, take responsibility. The military said privacy restrictions prevented contact." Victoria's expression made it clear she wasn't impressed by his half-hearted attempts at redemption. "You disappeared," she replied coldly. "Changed your name, moved across the country, built a new life like Timothy never existed." Standing in that glass office, Devon finally understood the scope of what he'd destroyed. Not just Timothy's life, but Victoria's faith in justice and the possibility that good people were protected from senseless violence. He'd taken her brother and her innocence, and her ability to trust that the system would hold people accountable. "I should fire you," Victoria said, voice dangerously quiet. "I should destroy your life the way you destroyed mine. Make sure you never see your daughter again." The threat made every protective instinct spike into red alert. Zoe was the one pure thing in his life. Victoria could take his job, his reputation, his freedom, but threatening his daughter crossed a line. "That's where we have a problem," Devon said, his voice carrying undertones that made Victoria step backward. For the first time, she was looking at Staff Sergeant Walsh instead of Devon Santos. "Zoe is innocent. Whatever you do to me, she doesn't deserve to pay for my mistakes." The change in his demeanor was subtle, but unmistakable, reminding Victoria that the man who'd killed her brother was still present, beneath the humble custodian exterior. They stared at each other across 10 years of pain and planning, predator and prey roles shifting. Victoria had orchestrated this perfectly, but she hadn't considered what it would mean to corner someone who had nothing left to lose except the one thing that mattered most. "I need time to think," she said, corporate composure cracking to reveal the grieving sister underneath. "About what justice looks like after 10 years. Devon turned towards the door, then stopped. "The sparring sessions," he said without turning around. "You were studying me, learning how I move, what my weaknesses are. The month of training hadn't been revenge. It had been reconnaissance." "Yes," Victoria admitted. "I needed to see if you were still the same man who killed Timothy. If you'd learned anything about control." She paused. "You're not what I expected. The monster I've been hunting turned out to be just broken." Devon left without responding, but Victoria's words followed him. Broken. The assessment was accurate in ways Victoria probably didn't understand. Devon Santos had been carefully constructed from the wreckage of Staff Sergeant Walsh, built around Rachel's love and Zoe's need for a father who could choose gentleness over violence. But underneath, the original damage remained. Driving home through empty Phoenix streets, Devon tried to process Victoria's deception and plan his response. She held all the cards, money, influence, detailed knowledge of his circumstances, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd threatened Zoe. That transformed their conflict from justice versus mercy into something far more primal. Devon had spent 10 years learning to be a better man, but threatening his daughter reminded him that some instincts were too fundamental to reprogram. Devon didn't show up for work the next night. By Monday, human resources had called about his absences, but Devon couldn't care about employment policies when his world was collapsing. He sat in their apartment, staring at acceptance letters from Zoe's new school, the expensive private academy he'd never been able to afford before Victoria's mysterious benefits made it possible. Everything was contaminated now: the health insurance, the education fund, the programs that appeared exactly when needed. Zoe noticed his mood during their afternoon routine. "Are you sick, Daddy?" she asked, looking up from homework with Rachel's eyes. At 9 years old, she still believed fathers were invincible. "Just tired, sweetheart," Devon lied, because how do you explain that everything safe in her world might disappear because of something terrible her father did before she was born? Tuesday brought registered mail and a black sedan parked across from Zoe's school. The legal documents were precisely what Devon expected: notification of a civil suit claiming damages related to Timothy's death, and Devon's fraud in obtaining employment under false pretenses. But it was the sedan that made his blood run cold. Professional surveillance. Victoria wasn't just going after his finances. She was documenting his life, probably building a case for why he was an unfit parent. Wednesday evening brought the phone call that changed everything. Zoe's babysitter was crying as she explained Devon needed to come to the hospital immediately. Zoe had collapsed during recess, severe allergic reaction, and paramedics were working to stabilize her breathing. The next 4 hours were the longest of Devon's life since Rachel's final night. Zoe lay unconscious in pediatric ICU, connected to machines while doctors tried to determine what triggered the response. It was past midnight when Zoe opened her eyes. "Daddy?" she whispered, voice hoarse. "Are you crying?" Devon realized he was, relief flooding through him. "Just happy you're okay, bug," he managed, squeezing her hand. That's when he heard footsteps and turned to see Victoria Chen approaching. She moved with controlled grace, but something was different about her expression. Instead of calculated fury, her face showed genuine concern mixed with something that looked like guilt. "How is she?" Victoria asked quietly, eyes focused on Zoe rather than Devon. There was nothing predatory about her posture now, just a woman who understood what it meant to lose someone loved. "Better," Devon replied, not sure why he was answering instead of demanding to know what she was doing there. Doctors think it was severe allergic reaction, but they haven't identified the trigger. "Did you have something to do with this?" Devon asked, watching Victoria's expression shift to something that looked like genuine hurt. "No," she said firmly. "I would never hurt a child. Never." The conviction was absolute, and Devon found himself believing her despite everything. Whatever else Victoria might be capable of, deliberately harming a 9-year-old wasn't on the list. "Then why are you here?" Devon asked, exhaustion making him more direct than usual. Victoria stepped into the room, movements careful and respectful. "Because I heard the call on emergency scanner," she said quietly. "And because I know what it's like to lose someone you love. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, even—" She gestured vaguely, unable to finish. "Even your brother's killer." Zoe stirred, eyes focusing on the unfamiliar woman. "Who's the pretty lady, Daddy?" she asked, voice still weak but curious. Devon felt his heart clench at the innocence. "This is Ms. Chen," he said carefully. "She works where Daddy works." Victoria moved closer to the bed, expression softening in a way that seemed automatic rather than calculated. Are you the nice lady who made it so I could go to the better school? Zoe asked. Devon's breath caught. He hadn't realized Zoe understood the connection. Children were often more perceptive than adults gave them credit for. Victoria knelt beside the bed, bringing herself to eye level. I just helped a little, she said softly. Your daddy works very hard to take care of you. Daddy says you knew my Uncle Timothy, Zoe continued innocently. Devon felt blood drain from his face as he realized she'd been listening to more conversations than he'd thought. Victoria went very still, eyes moving from Zoe to Devon. Yes, she said quietly. I knew Timothy. He was a very good man who wanted to help people. Daddy says Uncle Timothy would have been a good teacher, Zoe said, settling into her pillows. Daddy says we should remember good people by being good people too. The simple wisdom hung in the air, a child's interpretation of complex grief that somehow cut straight to the heart of their conflict. Devon watched Victoria's face as she processed Zoe's words, seeing something shift that looked almost like surprise. This wasn't the interaction she'd expected with her brother's killer's daughter. Zoe wasn't a symbol of Devon's selfishness. She was just a 9-year-old recovering from a medical emergency, innocent and completely unaware of the adult drama swirling around her bed. Your Uncle Timothy would be very proud of you, Victoria said finally, voice thick with emotion, and very proud of your daddy for taking such good care of you. The admission seemed to surprise her, as if she'd discovered something about Devon that didn't fit her narrative about his character. As Zoe drifted back to sleep, Devon found himself alone with Victoria in the quiet of the hospital room. The machines provided steady electronic heartbeat while Phoenix woke to another day, unaware that two people's understanding of justice was being altered by a child's innocent questions. She doesn't know, Victoria said quietly. Not really a question, but an observation that carried unexpected weight. Devon's daughter didn't know her father had killed someone, didn't understand that the nice lady from work was planning to destroy their family. To Zoe, the world was still a place where good people helped each other. I'll tell her someday, Devon replied, voice barely above a whisper. When she's old enough to understand. When she can handle the truth about who her father really is. Victoria stood by the window, looking out at morning light. Timothy would have loved her, she said unexpectedly. He always wanted to be an uncle. I'm sorry, Devon said, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. I'm sorry about Timothy. I'm sorry about the pain I caused your family. I'm sorry it took 10 years for me to say that to your face. Victoria turned from the window, expression unreadable. Sorry doesn't bring him back, she said, but there was less anger than before. Something about Zoe's innocence had shifted the dynamic between them. What happens now? Devon asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Victoria looked at Zoe sleeping peacefully, then back at Devon. I don't know, she said quietly. I spent 5 years planning for this confrontation, but I never planned for her to make it complicated. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. 3 weeks later, Devon stood in a renovated office space in downtown Phoenix, reading the brass nameplate, Timothy Chen Memorial Foundation, Veteran Support Services. Victoria had called the morning after Zoe's discharge with an offer that defied everything he understood about revenge. Instead of destroying his life, she wanted him to help honor Timothy's memory by helping other veterans avoid similar tragedies. I spent 5 years planning to destroy you, Victoria had said during their first meeting. But I realized destroying you wouldn't honor Timothy's memory. It would just create more Timothys. More families torn apart by violence and PTSD. The foundation was ambitious and well-funded, drawing on Victoria's resources and the settlement money from Timothy's death, individual therapy for veterans struggling with anger management, group sessions focused on accountability and healing, family support services for those affected by combat trauma. But the most radical element was Devon's role. Victoria wanted him as primary counselor for the most difficult cases, veterans whose anger and violence had already caused damage. The theory was simple. Who better to help violent veterans than someone who understood the consequences of losing control? Who better to model accountability than someone who'd done the work of transformation? Devon's first group session was scheduled for a Tuesday in October, exactly 10 years after Rachel's death. 8 veterans, all carrying the weight of actions they couldn't undo. "My name is Devon Walsh," he began, standing in front of the circle of chairs. 10 years ago, I killed someone during a training accident because I couldn't control my anger. The words still felt like swallowing glass, but they were necessary. The response was immediate. Several veterans shifted in their chairs, recognizing something familiar. Maria Santos, a female Marine who'd hospitalized her ex-boyfriend during a PTSD episode, leaned forward with attention. James Mitchell, whose bar fight had left another man disabled, made eye contact for the first time. "I'm not here to tell you I've solved everything," Devon continued. "I'm here because I learned the difference between carrying guilt and carrying responsibility. One destroys you, the other rebuilds you." The distinction had taken years to understand, countless therapy sessions to internalize. "What's the difference?" asked Roberto Valdez, a Navy veteran whose domestic violence had cost him his marriage and children. The question carried desperate hope mixed with skepticism. "Guilt says, I am a bad person who did a bad thing," Devon replied. "Responsibility says, I am a person who did a bad thing and needs to do better." Guilt ends conversations. Responsibility starts them. Over the following weeks, Devon discovered he had a gift for working with violent veterans. His honesty about his failures created safety for others to share without judgment. His accountability for Timothy's death gave him credibility with veterans who'd been lied to by civilians who couldn't understand the weight of taking a life. The breakthrough came 3 months in, during a session with Jake Morrison, an Army Ranger whose assault had landed him in prison. Jake had been resistant, convinced his violence defined him in ways that couldn't be changed. But during a session about making amends to victims, he finally opened up. "I keep seeing his face," Jake said, voice barely a whisper. "The kid I hurt. He was trying to help me get home safely, and I nearly killed him because my brain thought he was an insurgent." The confession was raw and immediate, and Devon recognized the same moral injury that defined his relationship with Timothy's memory. "By making sure it never happens again," Devon replied, leaning forward. "By learning to recognize your triggers and developing better responses. By accepting that you can't undo what happened, but you can prevent it from happening to someone else." He paused, making eye contact. "And by understanding that the person you hurt would probably want you to heal rather than destroy yourself." After that session, Jake became one of the program's most committed participants, eventually transitioning into a peer counselor role. His transformation became a model for what the Foundation could accomplish, not just symptom management, but genuine character change rooted in service to others. Victoria watched these transformations with pride and bewilderment, as if she couldn't believe her plan for revenge had evolved into something that actually honored Timothy's memory. "I dreamed about him last night," Victoria said during one of their planning sessions. Timothy. He was watching Jake work with a new veteran, and he was smiling. It was the first time I'd dreamed about him without anger. Devon nodded, understanding the significance. "Rachel visits me in dreams sometimes too, usually when I need guidance about Zoe or the program. Maybe the people we've lost find ways to let us know when we're moving in the right direction." "Do you think he forgives you?" Victoria asked, genuine curiosity rather than accusation in her voice. The question was dangerous territory, too close to absolution for someone who'd spent 10 years believing he deserved eternal punishment. I think he's proud of what we've accomplished together, Devon replied carefully. I think he'd be amazed that his death led to something that's helped dozens of veterans and families heal. 1 year after their confrontation, Devon and Victoria stood in the Foundation's conference room, preparing for the annual donor gala that would determine funding for expansion. The statistics were impressive. 47 veterans served, 38 families stabilized, 12 suicide attempts prevented, 5% recidivism rate among graduates. But the real measure was visible in faces like Jake Morrison's, veterans who'd learned to channel protective instincts into service rather than destruction. In families where counseling had prevented divorce and rebuilt trust. In children who'd learned to trust their fathers again after witnessing commitment to change. Timothy would be amazed, Victoria said, reviewing presentation materials. His death has prevented so much violence, helped so many families stay together. Her voice carried wonder, as if she still couldn't believe something positive had emerged from such tragedy. The gala went better than either had hoped. Devon's keynote about accountability and transformation received a standing ovation, and major donors committed to multi-year funding that would allow statewide expansion. But the moment that mattered most came when Jake Morrison delivered his remarks as a program graduate. "A year ago, I was convinced I was a monster," Jake began, words carrying across the silent ballroom. "I'd hurt an innocent person during a PTSD episode, and I believed that meant I was beyond redemption." He paused, making eye contact with Devon and Victoria. "This program taught me the difference between being defined by my worst moment and being motivated by it." After the gala ended and donors departed, Devon and Victoria found themselves alone in the conference room, surrounded by the debris of a successful fundraising event. Timothy's photograph watched over it all with that same serious smile that had defined his short life. "1 year ago we were enemies," Victoria said, settling into a chair with exhausted satisfaction. "Tonight we're partners in something Timothy would approve of." The evolution was remarkable when viewed from that perspective, from hunter and prey to collaborators in healing. "Do you ever regret it?" Devon asked, genuine curiosity overriding caution. "Choosing this instead of revenge?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, gaze fixed on Timothy's photograph. "I regret that it took me 5 years to find this path," she said finally. "But choosing the Foundation over revenge? No, this is what Timothy would want." Devon nodded, understanding the weight of what she was saying. Revenge would have been simpler, more emotionally satisfying short-term. But the Foundation had created something lasting, something that would continue helping veterans and families long after both were gone. Timothy's legacy wasn't defined by how he died, but by what his death had inspired. 2 years after the Foundation's launch, Devon stood before a congressional subcommittee, testifying about trauma-informed accountability programs in reducing veteran suicide and domestic violence. The Timothy Chen Memorial Foundation had become a national model, with replication sites in 12 states and federal funding for 50 cities over 5 years. But the most meaningful moment came not in Congress, but in a quiet corner of their Phoenix office, where 11-year-old Zoe sat doing homework while waiting for her father to finish work. She was beginning to understand the complexity of Devon's past and significance of his present work. She knew her father had once hurt someone, and that he'd spent years learning to help people instead. "Daddy," Zoe said, looking up from her worksheet with characteristic directness. "Do you think Uncle Timothy would like me?" The question was innocent but profound, reflecting her growing awareness of the man whose memory shaped their daily life. "I think Uncle Timothy would love you completely." Devon replied, kneeling beside her chair with gentle attention he'd learned from Rachel. "I think he'd be amazed by how smart and kind and brave you are. And I think he'd be proud that his memory inspired something good in the world." Victoria appeared in the doorway, having finished her congressional testimony about corporate social responsibility and veteran services. Her presence had evolved from threatening to supportive to something approaching family, someone who cared about Zoe's well-being and understood the weight Devon carried as a single father. Their funding expansion to all 50 states over 3 years, Victoria reported, professional composure unable to hide her excitement. Full federal support for trauma-informed veteran services, with the Timothy Chen model as national standard. The achievement was remarkable for a program that had begun as an alternative to personal revenge. As evening settled over Phoenix, the three of them prepared to leave for their weekly dinner together, a tradition that had evolved from practical coordination into family ritual. These dinners gave Zoe time with Victoria, who'd become an unexpected source of guidance. They gave Devon and Victoria space to process their work's emotional weight, and they honored Timothy's memory by creating the kind of loving, supportive community he would have wanted. Walking to their cars, Devon felt the weight of Rachel's bracelet and thought about the incredible journey that had brought them here. 10 years ago, he'd been a broken veteran consumed by guilt. Tonight, he was heading home to a daughter proud of his work and a life that had meaning beyond survival. "Rachel would be amazed," he said quietly, not really addressing Victoria but needing to voice the thought. His deceased wife had believed in redemption and second chances, but even she might have been surprised by what had grown from Devon's worst moment. "Timothy too," Victoria replied, understanding the significance of what Devon was processing. He always believed hurt people could learn to stop hurting others. He just never got the chance to see it proven on this scale. Driving home through familiar Phoenix streets, Devon thought about the ripple effects of choices made in crucial moments. Timothy's decision to help a struggling veteran, Victoria's decision to choose healing over revenge, Devon's decision to accept responsibility instead of running. Each choice had created consequences extending far beyond the individuals involved. At home, as Devon tucked Zoe into bed, she asked the question that had become part of their nightly routine. "Did you help someone today, Daddy?" Tonight, like most nights, the answer was yes. A veteran in crisis, a family in transition, a community learning to support its most vulnerable members. Alone in his bedroom, Devon held Rachel's bracelet and thought about the journey from Staff Sergeant Walsh to Devon Santos, to his current identity as someone defined not by his worst moment, but by his response to it. The leather was worn smooth from years of nervous touching, but the engraved words remained clear: strength in silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to honor Timothy's memory through practical service. Veterans who needed help controlling anger, families navigating trauma's aftermath, communities learning how accountability and healing could coexist with justice. But tonight, Devon fell asleep in a house filled with love, surrounded by evidence that redemption was possible and no mistake was too large to overcome through commitment to change. Timothy Chen's death had not been meaningless. Victoria's choice of healing over revenge had created something beautiful. And Devon's journey from perpetrator to healer proved that people could transform their greatest failures into their most meaningful contributions. The bracelet rested on his nightstand, catching light from Phoenix street lamps, a reminder that strength indeed lived in silence, the quiet choice to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm, to love rather than fear. In the morning, the work would continue, guided by memory of two people who'd believed in second chances and the transformative power of choosing hope over despair.